See this now, see it well. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. Tonight, on the Comic Book Report Comics by Night, The Dark Tower, The Gunslinger Born. Stick around and check it out. Greetings from Midworld, everyone. My name is Dominic, and you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And tonight, we're taking a look at The Dark Tower, The Gunslinger Born. This is the first graphic novel in a set of prequel comic books tying into Stephen King's classic Dark Tower series. And I'm excited to give it a review for you all today. But first, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written by Peter David, plotted by Robin Furth, and penciled by Jay Lee. The issues in this volume were first published by Marvel Comics beginning in 2007. The volume itself collects Dark Tower, The Gunslinger Born, issues 1 through 7. Finally, this standard size hardcover comes in at 240 pages. At this time, I'd like to issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through today's collection, as well as commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at today's collection. I went ahead and brought out the other 4 graphic novels that make up the kind of prequel saga graphic novels for the Dark Tower comics. After this, there's also like the Little Sisters of Illyria and some other books. I know they actually start going through Stephen King's Dark Tower in graphic novel format. However, I don't believe they've continued at this point, but I know they started the franchise. But anyway, here are the first 5 volumes. We'll be looking at the first one today. That again is The Gunslinger Born. Here's another quick look at all those books I just talked about. And at this time, I'd like to say, if you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please feel free to do so. We do at least weekly videos, lots of reviews, unboxings, and other random comic book miscellany. Here's another look at the collection proper. This will be the volume we review today in its entirety. And I have to say, over the last year or so, I've actually had this specific book requested a good handful of times. I am admittedly a Stephen King fan, so when I heard that there were comic books kind of tied into the world of Dark Tower, I was heavily interested, especially when I found out Robin Furth would be kind of assisting with the plotting. That is one of Stephen King's personal aides, writing assistants, especially as they do all of their Dark Tower stuff. I know they were in charge of doing some of the Dark Tower encyclopedias and kind of companion editions. So when I heard they were involved, I was ecstatic, and I had high hopes for this series from moment one. And now that we've taken a look at the dust jacket, I want to go ahead and show you what Under the Dust Jacket looks like for this edition. This is a beautifully made hardcover. I know I got this for really cheap back in the day. I think you can still find this edition for about $15, $20 online. Great hardcover, just beautiful. Got some of the gold text on the actual book itself. Just stunning work. And in a moment, as we transition to the actual contents of the books, I just want to say as well, in addition to Robin Furth, we actually have it written by Peter David, who of course is a comics legend. I've loved what I've read of his Hulk run, his X Factor run, and a couple other this and that throughout the years. Spider-Man 2099, I mean, the list goes on and on. The guy is a definite master of the craft. To pair him up with Jay Lee, love his art. This is actually the first time I ever saw Jay Lee artwork in comic books, and I was just floored. I know not too long ago I did that Batman, Superman, New 52 Crossworld review. That was also by Jay Lee. He's just done some incredible stuff, and if you see Jay Lee's work, it's unmistakably Jay Lee. So you'll be treated to that throughout this volume, and it's stunning here. I think he definitely realizes Midworld and the world of the Gunslinger and the Dark Tower in a way I kind of always dreamed of. I feel like one of the defining qualities of Jay Lee's art style is a kind of surrealistic, dreamlike quality. I don't even know why that is. I don't have the best kind of artistic analysis, but there's a quality to it. I don't know if it's kind of the way things sort of blend into the background, or how he does sweeping kind of curly shapes and figures juxtaposed against very sharp objects. I don't know what it is. There's something about the art that looks dreamy and kind of surreal, which is so perfect for the world of the Dark Tower that's starting to move on, pass on, get old. And yeah, it's just fantastic. An absolutely great pairing to go ahead and just realize the Gunslinger. As far as what the Dark Tower is, what the Gunslinger is, especially if you're uninitiated or haven't at all read any of Stephen King's Dark Tower series, basically the Dark Tower is at like the nexus, central point of all realities, all universes. There is this actual physical tower that stands at like the junction of all reality. And while it stands, all of the like existence, all of reality is held together. The fear is that the Dark Tower is being invaded by an evil force, or that it's beginning to crumble and fall, and when it does, all existence will fall into darkness and oblivion. In comes the Gunslinger, the last of the line of Eld. He's kind of a multiverse descendant of King Arthur, but instead of swords, they wield pistols like revolvers, and he's a gunslinger. It's kind of like a knight meets a cowboy, and he has had a quest to find the Dark Tower, to climb the tower and kind of save reality. And that is overall the giant story of all of the Dark Tower franchise. What this comic book is a prequel to the Dark Tower. So this is kind of like the Gunslinger origins. Roland of Gilead, he is the Gunslinger, the titular character, the protagonist of this work. And this covers kind of his origin when he takes his test to become a gunslinger and get his first pair of guns. When he kind of, ascends and transitions into manhood and becomes this kind of knight. And this also shows his first kind of mission as a gunslinger. It shows his first and maybe truest love of his life in Susan Delgado, and just the ultimate tragedy of this character and of his entire quest. And we have that all within the pages of The Gunslinger Born. Interestingly enough, while this is its own complete, unique prequel comic book, it is also largely an adaptation of portions of the fourth Dark Tower novel, that being Wizard and Glass. There's a portion of that book that flashes back to this actual story here. So in many ways, The Gunslinger Born is just kind of a snippet adapted from that Stephen King novel. However, there are some creative liberties here. It kind of expands on the story, and of course you get to see it visually realized in the form of this graphic novel. The rest of the prequel comic books actually have, I think, more creative, kind of independent stories that aren't as linked to the books themselves, take a little more creative liberties. So it's interesting to see that after this book, it kind of departs into a kind of a unique story that, again, still fits in canonically with the Dark Tower novels, but isn't as much of a direct adaptation of what King kind of spelled out in that Wizard and Glass book as this one is here. As you've been seeing over the last several minutes, Jay Lee's art is absolutely electrifying. These images are haunting and jump out the page, and I feel like it perfectly fits the extensive world building we get in this franchise and in this graphic novel here. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and talk about what might be the most detracting point of this graphic novel. While overall I really enjoyed it, I kind of have a hard time grasping how accessible this is going to be to someone who has never read any of the Dark Tower novels. While I do think this is starting from the beginning and it jumps right in, and I think it's, again, from the beginning, you should be able to start this story and have a low barrier to entry and enjoy it. However, it's so heavy with the world building from the franchise from the first moment in this book that I'm not totally sure if it makes sense to someone who has no grid for this world yet. So I'd be super curious in the comments, if you've never read the Dark Tower novels but started this comic book, does this make sense to you? Does it stand alone as its own thing well enough that you could jump in and feel like you understand what's happening? Or do you need the broader Dark Tower novels as a kind of greater context to what you're reading here? Let me know below. I think overall, if I had to take a guess, if you are completely unfamiliar about this world, I think that this will be a kind of confusing read, but doable if you start from this graphic novel. However, speaking as someone who's read the Dark Tower novels for the most part and then jumped into these graphic novel series, it is absolutely a fun and enriching experience. I will say as well, for someone who's going in totally blind, there is a parental advisory. This does get dark, it does get violent, bloody, and just a little creepy. It's borderline horror, action, adventure, and there's just some disturbing elements to it that, younger readers probably should stay away from Dark Tower. But certainly there is an audience for this. Overall, I was unbelievably impressed with all Peter David and Robin Furth and Jay Lee were able to do in this novel to really capture a lot of the heartbreak and just sort of intrinsic tragedy of the character of Roland Deschain, the gunslinger, the last of the line of Eld, as he begins his quest toward the Dark Tower. I think for fans of kind of science fiction, fantasy, dystopia, even westerns, I think fans of that will absolutely love the Dark Tower, especially if you favor a little bit of a darker twist. And as we finish the extras at the back of the book here, I think it's time we go ahead and give The Dark Tower, The Gunslinger Born, a grade. For its exceptionally stylized art and just incredible sense of scope and world building, the Comic Book Report is happy to give The Dark Tower, The Gunslinger Born, a B. For fans of the franchise, this is a no-brainer read, but for those interested in a Western dystopian fantasy series, this might still be worth a pickup. If you've read it, go ahead and let me know in the comments below. And until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report, Comics by Night. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and check out some of my other videos. Long days and pleasant nights.